My mom didn't ease into it. She didn't ask how work was going, didn't mention Thanksgiving pie, didn't even pretend this was a normal family call. She said, "You can't come to Thanksgiving until you apologize." Like she was reading a rule off a sign she'd already nailed to the front door. I was standing in my apartment kitchen in suburban Minneapolis. One hand on a mug gone cold, the other gripping my phone so hard my knuckles hurt. I'm Nora Whitman. I'm 34, and for most of my life, I've been the one people called when numbers stop making sense. I work as a forensic accountant for a medical equipment company, which means I spend my days finding the thing everyone else hopes buried. That night, I didn't need a spreadsheet to know what this call was really about. It wasn't Thanksgiving. It wasn't family peace. It was the same demand dressed up in fall colors. Co-sign a $25,000 car loan for my younger sister, smile while doing it, and thank everyone for the privilege. I had already said no twice. Calmly, clearly, permanently. My mother took a breath, and then her voice changed into that tone she used when she wanted pain to land clean. "Surprise. It's time you heard this. You were adopted." She let the silence sit there, waiting for me to crack, waiting for me to beg, waiting for me to feel so unsteady I'd agree to anything. Instead, I said, "Then maybe it's time you stop acting like I owe you interest on a life you chose." I didn't hear my sister speak, but I heard my mother's smile disappear. Before I tell you what she said next and why that Thanksgiving dinner ended with one envelope on the table and nobody touching dessert, tell me what time is it for you right now and where are you watching from? I'm curious to see how far this story will travel. The thing about hearing a sentence like that isn't the shock. Not at first. It's the way your mind starts pulling old moments out of storage and lining them up like evidence. The birthday where my sister got a used car and I got a speech about responsibility. The college years when I worked nights, took out my own loans, and listened to my mother praise natural family loyalty whenever Kelsey needed something covered. The Thanksgivings where I bought half the gifts under the tree, but somehow still ended up being called difficult if I asked one practical question about money. My mother had always loved me in a way that came with invoices attached. She packed lunches, remembered fevers, ironed choir dresses, showed up to school events, and then later reminded me how much she had done whenever I hesitated to rescue someone else. That was what made the adoption line so vicious. Not because it erased my childhood, but because she pulled it out like a weapon the second obedience failed. 10 minutes after the call, my phone lit up again. Kelsey. I let it ring once, twice, 6 times. Then she texted, "Real mature. Mom's crying. You could end this by saying sorry." I stared at the screen and laughed once, short and sharp. Kelsey had always been good at turning convenience into crisis. She was 30. Charming when she wanted something. Careless with bills. Allergic to consequences. And permanently surrounded by explanations that somehow never counted as excuses when they came from her. The car loan wasn't about transportation. She already had a leased SUV she could barely afford. This new loan was for a luxury crossover with upgraded trim, a vanity purchase wrapped in a story about needing something reliable for winter. I knew that because 2 weeks earlier, before everyone realized I wouldn't cooperate, Kelsey had bragged about the panoramic roof, heated rear seats, and cream leather interior. Need had never come with cream leather interior. She showed up at my apartment the next evening wearing a camel coat I knew she couldn't afford, and the expression of someone who had practiced outrage in the mirror. I opened the door halfway. She pushed it wider without asking. "You really did it," she said. "You upset Mom enough that she had to tell you." I closed the door behind her and said, "No." She decided to say something cruel because I wouldn't finance your ego. Kelsey flinched, then recovered fast. "It's not ego. I need the car." "You need a budget," I said, "and a bank willing to ignore your credit history without using my name as bait." Her face hardened. "You think you're better than me because you're organized. That's your whole personality." "No," I said. "I think I learned early that nobody was coming to save me, and you learned early somebody always would." That landed. I could tell because her eyes shifted away for half a second. Then she went low. "Maybe Mom told you because she's tired of pretending. Maybe you were never really one of us, and this just proved it." There it was. Not anger, strategy. She wanted that line to wound enough to make me grab for belonging. But something in me had already changed. I looked at her and said, "If family means signing whatever you slide across the table and calling it love, then no, maybe I was never built for this version of it." She folded her arms and said, Enjoy Thanksgiving alone. I stepped aside and opened the door. Enjoy your loan application. She left with the kind of silence people carry when they expected tears and got a locked expression instead. An hour later, I pulled up her public court records and credit filings. Forensic accounting had ruined my ability to ignore patterns, and Kelsey Whitman had a pattern. What I found would have been almost funny if my name weren't so close to the blast radius. Late payment judgments, a dismissed collection claim, 2 maxed cards, 1 closed line of credit, a personal loan she'd opened 8 months earlier and nearly stopped paying. Then I saw the detail that made my stomach drop. Her existing lease had been 3 months from default, and my mother had already tried to help by moving money around from a home equity line. Suddenly, the pressure made sense. They weren't asking me to support family. They were trying to patch a sinking floor with my credit score. And once I saw that, old memories started rearranging themselves into something uglier. The emergency bridal deposit I had covered years ago and never got repaid because the engagement ended. The rent shortfall I had quietly paid during one temporary setback. The laptop replacement. The dentist bill. The holiday cash envelopes. Over 12 years, I had transferred or directly paid just over $18,000 connected to Kelsey's life. Not gifts, not generosity freely given, pressure money, peacekeeping money, money spent buying a few quiet weeks at a time. That number sat in my chest heavier than the adoption line, because one revelation hurt my feelings. The other explained my role. I barely slept that night. The next afternoon, my grandmother Evelyn called and said only, "Come by, bring your coat." I made stew, and I'm too old to ask nicely twice. Grandma Evelyn lived 20 minutes away in a brick rambler that smelled like cedar, pepper, and the same hand cream she'd used since I was a kid. She never wasted words, never confused softness with weakness. When I walked in, she took one look at my face and said, "So she finally used it." I stopped with one glove half off. "You knew?" She sat down a ladle, sighed once, and said, "I knew there was a version of the truth kept in that house for emergencies. I just didn't know your mother would be selfish enough to turn it into a knife." We sat at her kitchen table, while snow pressed lightly against the window. I wanted a speech, a clean explanation, something neat enough to place on a shelf. Instead, she gave me a story. "When I was 32, she said, your grandfather lost money in a business deal and told me not to ask questions. He said being a good wife meant trust. You know what I learned? Some people say trust when what they want is silence. I stayed quiet for a year and nearly lost the house over that lesson." She looked straight at me. "Family can ask for help. Family cannot demand blindness." That was more useful than comfort. More useful than all the polished language people use when they want to sound wise. Then she reached into a drawer and slid a manila envelope across the table. "Your mother doesn't know I kept copies." Inside was a stack of old adoption paperwork, an agency letter, and a note written in blue ink from a caseworker who had handled the placement. Attached to the back was something else. A letter addressed to me from my birth mother, to be given when I turned 21. If possible. It had never been given. My fingers went numb before I even opened it. Grandma Evelyn watched me carefully and said, "Read it when you're ready, but know this first. You were wanted. Your mother's latest performance doesn't change that." I didn't cry right away. I just sat there with years shifting under me. Then I asked the question that had started burning the second she handed me the envelope. "Did my mother keep this from me on purpose?" Grandma Evelyn's mouth tightened. "I think she convinced herself she was protecting her place in your life. Then 1 year became 5, then 10, then too long to admit." I looked down at the envelope again. "And now, she said. She's using the thing she hid to collect a payment she hasn't earned." I read the letter at my apartment after midnight with every lamp on. My birth mother's name was Elena Morales. She was 19 when I was born. The letter wasn't dramatic. That was the devastating part. It was careful, hopeful, and deeply ordinary. She wrote that she was signing papers because she wanted me to have stability she could not give yet. She wrote that she loved music, that she hoped I laughed easily, that if I ever found the letter as an adult, she wanted me to know my existence had not been a mistake or a burden. No hidden fortune, no cinematic twist, just love without possession, love without bookkeeping. I folded the pages back together and sat on my couch until dawn, hearing my mother's voice from the night before in a completely different key. "Surprise. It's time you heard this. As if my identity were a punishment she had the right to schedule. By morning, grief had burned clean into clarity. I wasn't apologizing. I wasn't co-signing. And I definitely wasn't walking into Thanksgiving unarmed. I spent the next day doing what I do best. I built a timeline, dates of transfers, screenshots of old messages, Venmo records, a PDF of Kelsey's public filings, notes on the home equity loan my mother had quietly drawn against the house, copies of the adoption documents Grandma Evelyn had saved. I also found one more thing purely by accident when Kelsey emailed the wrong attachment to a family group thread while trying to send a Thanksgiving menu. It was a dealership finance worksheet. At the top, under intended co-applicant was my name, not blank, not discussed, typed in already with my employer information copied correctly, and a slightly outdated version of my annual salary. My stomach turned. They had not just planned to pressure me. They had started preparing a loan package around me before I agreed. That was the moment I stopped thinking of this as a family misunderstanding and started seeing it as attempted financial entrapment with holiday decorations around it. My mother called again that evening, voice sugary this time, which was always worse. "Nora, I think we should clear the air before Thanksgiving Eve." "We can," I said, "but I'm not apologizing." She exhaled sharply. "You are making this bigger than it is." "No," I said. "You made it bigger when you told me I couldn't come to Thanksgiving unless I financed Kelsey's car." "That is not what I said." "Good," I replied. "Then it'll be easy for you to say that in front of everyone." Silence, then quieter. "You don't understand the pressure Kelsey's under." "I understand it very well. I also understand she listed me as a co-applicant before I agreed." Another silence, this one different, not outrage, calculation. "You went digging," she said. "I work in fraud review," I told her. "I call it Tuesday." She tried one final turn. "After all these years, I thought you'd show more gratitude." That one almost impressed me. She went from guilt to adoption to gratitude in under a week, like she was cycling through old keys, hoping one would still fit. "Gratitude," I said slowly, "is not a credit facility." Then I hung up. Thanksgiving Eve arrived with hard, cold, pale sunlight and the kind of stillness Minneapolis gets right before evening lights turn everything soft. I wore black slacks, a cream sweater, small gold hoops, and the expression I reserved for meetings where someone is about to learn. I brought receipts. In my bag was the manila envelope, the printed timeline, and a decision I already trusted. No matter what happened in that house, I was done playing emotional collateral. My mother opened the door before I knocked, like she had been watching through the curtain. The house smelled like cinnamon candles and roast turkey. Lights glowed on the tree. Holiday music floated from the kitchen. It would have looked warm to anyone passing by. Inside, it felt staged. Kelsey was in the living room in a fitted red dress, smiling too fast, checking her phone every 30 seconds. Uncle Raymond stood near the fireplace, holding a mug and pretending not to notice the weather system moving through the room. Grandma Evelyn sat in the corner chair with the posture of someone who had survived enough family holidays to know when not to waste energy on fake peace. I handed over a bottle of wine, kissed no one, and took my seat. Dinner lasted 22 minutes before my mother set down her fork and said, "Before dessert, there's something we need to settle." Of course there was. Kelsey stared at her plate with rehearsed fragility. I set my napkin beside my glass and said, "Go ahead." My mother gave me the disappointed matriarch look she had polished over decades. This family has always shown up for each other. I think what happened this week was unfortunate, emotional, and unnecessary. Your sister needs help. You refused harshly, and what I said on the phone," she paused, making herself sound noble, "came from a place of hurt." I almost admired the edit. "You told me I couldn't come to Thanksgiving unless I apologized," I said. "Then you told me I was adopted because I wouldn't co-sign a luxury car loan." Kelsey cut in immediately. "It's not luxury. That's such a nasty way to frame it." I reached into my bag, pulled out the dealership worksheet, and slid it across the table. Cream leather interior, panoramic roof, premium winter package. It's luxury. Nobody touched the paper. My mother's face lost a degree of color. Kelsey tried anger next. "Why are you acting like I committed a crime?" "Because you listed me as a co-applicant before I agreed," I said. "That's why." Uncle Raymond finally looked up. "You? What?" Kelsey's eyes jumped to him, then to my mother, then back to me. It was just preliminary, the salesman said. Don't, I said. Not with me. Preliminary doesn't explain how my employer, salary band, and prior address ended up on a finance worksheet I never authorized. My mother straightened. Nora, enough. No, I said. Enough was about $5,000 ago. Enough was when every holiday turned into an invoice. Enough was when you weaponized my adoption because I finally said no. That landed harder than the paperwork. The room went so still I could hear the refrigerator motor from the kitchen. My mother's voice dropped. I raised you. You did, I said. And I have thanked you for that in 100 ways, some of them direct deposited. I slid the timeline out next. 12 years of payments, dates, notes, amounts, $18,460 connected to Kelsey's emergencies, deposits, shortfalls, and rescues. Uncle Raymond leaned forward. Grandma Evelyn didn't move at all. She already knew. Kelsey looked sick. That's not fair, she said. You're making it sound transactional. It became transactional the moment my seat at Thanksgiving got tied to your loan. My mother tried another angle. Family helps family. Family asks, I said. It doesn't threaten exile. It doesn't draft paperwork in somebody else's name. And it definitely doesn't pull sealed adoption information out like a grenade, because it isn't getting its way. Kelsey pushed back from the table. Mom didn't mean it like that. Grandma Evelyn spoke for the first time, calm and precise. How exactly did she mean it? That question hit the table like a glass dropped in slow motion. My mother looked toward her, then away. I was upset. Upset is slamming a cabinet, Grandma Evelyn said. What you did was strategic. Uncle Raymond put down his mug. Diane, is there more to this? He had the tone of a man already regretting how many times he had stayed out of things. I opened the manila envelope and placed the copy of Elena Morales' letter on the table, though I kept the original. There is. This was supposed to reach me when I was 21. It didn't. I got it 48 hours ago from Grandma, not from you. My mother looked truly frightened then, which was new. Nora, no. You don't get to soften my name while you explain why my entire identity was treated like leverage. Kelsey whispered. Mom, you said she always knew. My head turned so fast I felt it in my neck. She told you that? Kelsey's face gave her away. My mother had lied in both directions. To me, she implied I'd been told late because the moment forced her hand. To Kelsey, she'd apparently implied I'd always known. Probably to make the secret seem less monstrous. That was the crack. Once it opened, everything came through at once. Uncle Raymond asked whether the house was really in trouble. Kelsey started crying and admitting the lease situation was worse than she'd told everyone. My mother snapped at her for talking too much. Grandma Evelyn said, No, let her finish. And Kelsey, who had spent years avoiding the dignity of full truth, finally collapsed under the weight of partial lies. The SUV lease was behind. 2 credit cards were maxed. The personal loan had gone delinquent after she quit a job without another lined up. She wanted the new car, partly because the dealership had offered to roll negative equity into a new financing structure if she had a stronger cosigner. That cosigner was supposed to be me. My mother had already taken money from the home equity line trying to keep Kelsey afloat and was terrified of my stepfather finding out the full amount. So this whole week, Uncle Raymond said slowly, was about plugging one bad decision with another and using Nora's credit to do it. My mother said nothing, which was answer enough. I stood up because suddenly the table felt too small for what had just been admitted. Here's what happens next. I am not signing anything. I am not apologizing. And if my information has been submitted anywhere without my written consent, the next conversation won't be at Thanksgiving dinner. Kelsey looked horrified. You'd report us? I looked at her for a long second. I'd protect myself. That shouldn't shock you this much. Then I turned to my mother. And one more thing. You don't ever get to use my adoption story to rank my place in this family again. If you want a relationship with me after tonight, it starts with truth, not ownership. My mother's eyes filled, but I had crossed out tears as a working currency 5 minutes earlier. She said very quietly, I was afraid of losing you. I picked up the envelope. Then you should have tried honesty. Fear is not love, and control is not the same thing as keeping someone close. Nobody spoke when I sat back down. Dessert remained untouched. Outside, Snow started again. I didn't stay late. That was important. Old me would have stayed to manage everyone's feelings after the explosion. Would have made tea, softened edges, translated pain into something easier for the people who caused it. New me put on my coat while the room was still raw. Uncle Raymond walked me to the door and asked quietly if there was anything he needed to know immediately about the house or the paperwork. I told him to pull the home equity statements, freeze any unauthorized credit inquiries if they appeared, and stop accepting vague answers as a family communication style. He almost smiled at that. Kelsey tried to stop me in the hallway. Nora, wait. I turned. She looked younger when panic stripped the performance away. I didn't think it would go this far, she said. That's because it never has before, I replied. Someone always cleaned it up for you before you had to see the whole mess. She started crying harder and said she was scared. I believed her. Fear was finally doing what lectures hadn't. Then be scared usefully, I said. Call the dealership tomorrow. Cancel everything. Sell what you can. Get a payment plan. Take a second job. Do one hard thing before asking 5 other people to do it for you. She looked stunned, like nobody had ever handed her adulthood in plain language before. Maybe nobody had. I left before my mother could call after me. Snow cracked under my boots. My breath came white in the driveway. For the first time in years, I drove home from Thanksgiving without feeling like I had abandoned something. I felt like I had refused collection. The fallout came fast. 2 days later, Uncle Raymond called to say he had reviewed the financials and confronted my mother with the home equity statements. The amount she had drawn was larger than anyone knew. Not catastrophic, but enough to expose the habit. She had been quietly moving money, covering gaps, and hiding the scale of Kelsey's instability, because admitting it would mean admitting the family system she defended was failing. There were consequences this time, real ones. Uncle Raymond took over the household finances until the line of credit was stabilized. Kelsey canceled the luxury car application, sold off furniture she had financed, moved out of her overpriced apartment at the end of the lease, and picked up evening shifts at a physical therapy clinic after finding regular admin work. My mother was furious about the embarrassment for exactly 1 week, then too tired to keep performing outrage once the bills had to be named out loud. As for me, I froze my credit, notified the dealership in writing that no authorization had been given, and moved every important document into a locked file box I should have bought years earlier. Then I did something I had never done before. I did not chase reconciliation. I did not send a long message explaining my heart. I did not call to check whether my mother was okay with my boundaries, because boundaries that need permission are just requests in nicer shoes. 3 weeks passed, then 4. In January, a package arrived from my mother. No note at first glance. Just a small cedar box, and inside it, my baby bracelet from the hospital, the first pair of knit booties I came home in, and the original copy of Elena Morales' letter. Underneath was one handwritten page. Nora, I told myself I held that letter because I was afraid it would make me less your mother. The truth is uglier. Some part of me wanted to be the only beginning you knew. When you stopped obeying me, I used the secret cruelly. There is no version of that I can defend. I am sorry, not for being hurt, for what I chose to do with that hurt. I read it twice. It didn't fix anything. It wasn't supposed to, but it was the first honest thing she had sent me in years. Kelsey texted a week later. Not dramatic, not manipulative, just this. Sold the lease, took the clinic job. I hate that you were right. Which probably means you were right. I actually laughed. Then I put the phone down and waited before answering, because urgency had always been the family drug. This time I responded on my schedule. Good. Keep going. No extra softness, no punishment either. Just clean distance. That was new for all of us. By the next Thanksgiving, the shape of our family had changed enough that even silence felt different. My mother no longer called me, only when there was a problem to solve. Kelsey still struggled sometimes, but now when she did, she led with facts instead of atmosphere. Grandma Evelyn remained exactly who she had always been, which is to say the most stable person in any room where people confuse love with control. I met with an intermediary from the adoption agency that spring and learned more about Elena than fit inside one conversation. She had gone on to become a music teacher in Arizona, had married later, had 2 sons, and had passed away several years before I found the letter. That grief came strangely, not as devastation over someone I had known, but as a quiet ache for a voice I arrived too late to answer. Still knowing her changed me. Not because I suddenly belonged somewhere else, but because I finally understood that my life had not begun as a debt. It had begun as a difficult act of love, followed by years of care, followed by years of control. And those things were not all the same. The Thanksgiving after everything broke open, I arrived at my mother's house with one pie, one wrapped scarf for Grandma, and no desire to audition for a role I had retired from. The tree was smaller. The conversation was less polished. Kelsey had brought a practical used sedan she had purchased with cash, and a loan she qualified for on her own. Nobody applauded. That was healthy, too. Growth doesn't always arrive with violins. Sometimes it just parks in the driveway without dragging your name into the financing. After dinner, my mother and I ended up alone in the kitchen for a minute. She dried a plate and said without looking at me, "I still don't know how to live with what I did." I leaned against the counter and answered honestly, "Maybe you're not supposed to live with it comfortably." She nodded once. "Do you think we're okay?" I looked at the lights reflected faintly in the dark window over the sink. "I think we're real," I said. "That's probably better." She set the plate down and didn't argue. For my family, that counted as progress. Later, as I was leaving, Kelsey handed me a travel mug and said awkwardly, "Road coffee. No debt attached. It was corny. It was imperfect." It was probably the most emotionally mature gift she had ever given me. I took it, smiled despite myself, and walked out into the cold. On the drive home through the Minneapolis suburbs, the streets were lined with blue-white lights and the kind of winter stillness that makes every choice feel louder in retrospect. I thought about the phone call that had started everything, about the sentence meant to push me to my knees, about the reply that changed the room because it changed me first. There are people who will love you most when you are useful, agreeable, and easy to direct. There are people who panic the moment you stop paying for peace. And then there is the harder, quieter thing. Learning that keeping yourself does not mean losing your heart. It just means the people who want access to it have to arrive with clean hands. So if you were standing where I stood that winter, one demand away from being told you owed your place at the table, what would you protect first? The holiday or yourself?